And now, aviation weather around Alaska. Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska aviation weather outlook on this Sunday, September 22nd, 2024. We had the autumnal equinox arrive here in the northern hemisphere early this Sunday morning, and we're watching as of late this Sunday morning an area of low pressure on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula down around 967 millibars. This is going to be the dominant feature through this outlook. It's going to be lifting northeastward and be located in this region of the Western Gulf by, say, 9-10 a.m. Monday morning. And with the low in this position, it's got a very broad circulation. Ahead of it, there is a frontal system that's rapidly expanding northeastward into the Gulf. And with it, there's going to be some stronger winds along this frontal boundary. In fact, there are storm warnings in effect for this area of the Gulf as we go through this Sunday night. And there'll be moderate to locally heavy rainfall pushing into coastal areas all along the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. By the time we get into Monday morning, we expect IFR conditions here, southern Panhandle with moderate to locally heavy rain. And even the potential of a few flashes of lightning, rumbles of thunder here over the northwestern portion of the Gulf as this system is rather dynamic. Now on the backside, we have this broad low pressure circulation. We have brisk northeasterly offshore winds along the west coast. Those will eventually turn a little more north and then northwesterly, especially across the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern half of the Aleutians as we go through time. Monday afternoon, there could be some rumbles of thunder, flashes of lightning out over the central northeastern Gulf Coast area. We expect IFR conditions along the intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle and inside there of Yakutat Bay up along into British Columbia. In the far north, IFR conditions along the spine of the Brooks Range and north slope back toward Kaktovik. But again, a broad circulation with a low sitting in this position. We have the counterclockwise circulation, so the winds down here along the west coast will be northeast to north and then turning more north-northwest across the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians. As we get into Tuesday, with that moisture that's been forced inland in the southern parts of the mainland and the remnants there along the Panhandle, we have widespread IFR conditions, inner channels, inner coastal mountains of the Panhandle around Yakutat, back through, say, Cordova, Valdez, areas around Prince William Sound, and then on up into the Alaska Range. We expect IFR conditions, widespread IFR conditions along the spine of the Brooks Range all across the north slope and the Arctic coast. Lower ceilings, some visibilities, even some areas of generally light snow up that way, and that will continue into Tuesday afternoon. Widespread IFR conditions there, north slope and Arctic coast along the spine of the Brooks Range. Also IFR conditions along the central portions of the Alaska Range especially, and then down along areas of the eastern Kenai, Prince William Sound, northern Gulf Coast, all the way through Yakutat, up into the northern Panhandle around Haines, Skagway, Chilkoot, and White Passes. So pass conditions on Monday are expected to be generally IFR at Anaktuvik Pass northward along the spine of the Brooks Range northward, IFR south of there, MVFR, same thing Adigan Pass, IFR conditions there northward up across the entire north slope, MVFR conditions as you fly south of Adigan Pass. Now Lake Clark and Merrill starting out generally VFR conditions on Monday anticipated, and then Rainy Pass VFR as well. We're looking at Windy Pass with VFR conditions becoming MVFR, Isabel Pass, VFR conditions becoming MVFR, and then MVFR conditions likely Mentasta Pass. As we drop down through the Copper River Valley, MVFR conditions at Tanita Pass, and we expect MVFR conditions at Portage Pass, though as we progress further in time, Monday night into Tuesday very well could be some IFR conditions there, especially along areas of the northern Gulf Coast. Chilkoot and White generally stuck in IFR conditions as the result of the influences of that far-reaching front out ahead of the low pressure that will be sitting over the western Gulf as we go through Monday morning and afternoon. Freezing levels aloft, the low circulation centered here over the western Gulf, or at least moving into that area. Ahead of it, we've had the occluded front pushing up toward the Panhandle. So ahead of that occluded front, freezing levels are as high as 8,000 feet through the middle Panhandle, 10,000 feet south end of the Panhandle around Craig and Ketchikan, and then south of Haida Gwaii, 12 and 14,000 feet toward Vancouver Island. Troughiness, cooler air across much of the northern Bering Strait, and the northern half of the mainland. Freezing levels are below 2,000 feet or down near the surface there in the northern areas of the state, and certainly around any mountainous regions. And where we've had moisture pull inland, we expect potential in cloud or in areas of clouds and precipitation. Icing along the Gulf Coast above 6,000 feet as we go down along to the southern part of the Panhandle above 10,000 feet, because again, we're going to have that occluded front that's working its way northeastward up into areas along the Gulf Coast and Panhandle, and pockets of above 2,000 feet to moderate icing there in the central Brooks Range and along the North Slope. So the weather map has evolved at the jet stream level at 30,000 feet. Clearly we see a broad scale trough. We have ahead of it wind max, a jet core of 170 knots coming up into the southern panhandle, southern central panhandle with southwesterly flow, a broad low circulation centered over, say, Cook Inlet, the Kenai Peninsula, and then trailing off to the south and west along and south of the Aleutians, we have a jet core of 160 knots, more out of the west-northwest, and bringing it down to 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, clearly a broad low-pressure circulation that is centered over the western Gulf, eastern Kenai Peninsula, and ahead of it, a very broad, strong southwesterly flow ahead of it, anywhere from 40 to as high as 60, 70 knots coming into British Columbia and across Haida Gwaii. Back to the west, though, notice this is at 9,000 feet. We have the northeasterly flow along the west side of the state at 35 to 40 knots, and when we bring this down to 3,000 feet, which is not far from the surface, low circulation over the western Gulf. We have a area of 35 to as high as 50, 55 knot winds out over the central southern Gulf into the North Pacific, southwesterly flow pulling on up into the Panhandle. This is along that occluded front. Backside of the low circulation, broad area of northeast to north flow on the west side of the state coming across the Alaska Peninsula, anywhere from 35 to locally 40 and 45 knots. So that's going to spell for quite a bit of turbulence. We will start out in the east. We expect moderate turbulence over areas of the Panhandle, surface to 6,000 feet, and then along the Gulf Coast, especially back toward Prince William Sound, the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet. We could see some moderate turbulence, surface to 4,000 feet, and then across the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, moderate turbulence possible, surface to 3,000 feet, and then in that broader northeasterly kind of offshore flow along the west coast, we find areas of moderate turbulence from the western Brooks Range, Kotzebue Sound, much of the Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, the lower Yukon Delta, Nunavik Island, anywhere from the surface to 3,000 to surface to 4,000 feet in areas of the west and southwest.